How do you get your coffee fix when you're in the woods on two wheels? Welcome to the Throttle and Roast podcast. I'm your host, Niels Meersschaert. In this episode, we'll be looking at the ways to bring your favorite coffee shop to your campsite when you're moto camping. So let me start off with defining what is moto camping. Well, put quite simply, this is when you're camping on your motorcycle. There are some unique characteristics of camping on a motorcycle that I think are actually really wonderful about it, but it does also mean that you have to think about how you pack and what you pack a little differently than if you're doing car camping or even backpack camping. On a motorcycle, we have limited carrying space. So we're not going to have a huge trunk or a huge back part of an SUV where we can carry everything that we might possibly need. With the limited pack size, we're actually very concerned with the size of the items that we bring. And that makes a big difference for how we go camping. It may mean that we have to give up some of the things we may enjoy for when we're going camping. But to me, the experience of camping when you're on the motorcycle just brings these two worlds together wonderfully, because in a motorcycle, you're exposed to all the elements, you're enjoying all of the atmosphere, and it's the same thing when you're camping. So I think it just continues that experience in a very positive light. I personally have always found that my morning is incomplete without coffee. Now, yes, if you're camping on a motorcycle, you could go to your local coffee shop after you break up camp. But who wants to do that without coffee? Who wants to tear down their entire campsite, wait all that time until you actually go and have your first cup of coffee? It's actually a really wonderful thing to be sitting at the campsite and sipping a wonderful cup of coffee. So this is why, to me, you want to have that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that space is very limited on a motorcycle. So how we choose the items that we want to bring is going to be limited more by space than by desire. Now, personally, I always prioritize bringing coffee gear with me because it is something that is so important. Even if you choose to take stuff with you, there are some variability in the options that you could choose, and we're going to try to cover those in this episode. So what do you need for moto camping coffee? Well, while you could try to bring your home coffee gear with you, I'm going to go through some camping specific options, as they're going to be a little bit more compact and take up less space in your bags when you're on the motorcycle. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a stove and a kettle. So you really want to decide if you want to have discrete items like a separate stove and kettle or an integrated setup. If you're going to do it in a separate approach, you're going to want to forget about those 2-burner stoves like those from Eureka or Coleman that might be good for car camping. They're awesome for cooking meals, especially with a whole family, but their size pretty much makes them impractical for moto camping. What you want instead is small stoves that attach directly to a fuel canister. These are tiny, and the stove alone usually fits in the palm of your hand. So there's a couple that I can talk about here that I've had personal experience with. The first one is from MSR, and this is called the Pocket Rocket. Very small stove, very easy to control, nice, small size, not super expensive, works really well. Now, the other one that you can use would be from Snow Peak. This is called the Snow Peak Light Max. Again, nice, small size, fits in the palm of your hand, and you can mount it directly onto a fuel canister. Now, if you want to use a kettle with these, and I mean a traditional sort of a kettle like that you would have with a pouring spout, there's a couple that you can do that are really made for camping. And the advantage of these is that they're like the ones you have at home, but they're made out of lightweight materials, and they also collapse. So they're not going to take up quite as much pack space as a full kettle, which you could do as well, but I think those are just a little too bulky for when you're moto camping. So the first one I can talk about is the Sea to Summit Frontier Ultralight Collapsible Kettle. This is about 1.1 liters, and its focus is really being on as lightweight as possible. So mostly plastic sort of materials into there. It still works very, very well, though. It has a metal base that allows it to be heated directly onto the stove. So if you want the ultimate lightweight kettle, this is the one to go for. Now, if you want something that's a little bit more capacity, a little bit more metal construction in there so it'll retain heat a little bit more effectively, I could suggest the Sea to Summit Detour stainless steel collapsible kettle. This is, as I said, about 1.6 liters. Also a very good choice for having a kettle. So while both of these kettles are really compact and smaller than what you would have in terms of a standard kettle, they do take up some width and they may make them a bit harder to pack. I think the integrated options are actually better for moto camping. And especially if you have a few different bikes, having one setup that you can bring across all of them probably makes it a little bit easier. The other thing is that when you have your stove and your cook vessel integrated, they're nesting together, so the pack size is further minimized. Now, I'm going to start with a couple of options that I think are really good here, and I actually own both of these. The one that I'm going to start with is actually the least compact setup, and this is from a company called BioLite. So they started with stoves that supported villages in Africa. BioLite created these stoves with built-in fans to optimize the burn and reduce the smoke. The added benefit was that this heat probe could generate electricity to power the fans and also to provide lighting for the home. So they released a camping stove using that same technology in a much smaller setup. And now in its second generation, the Camp Stove 2 is about 8 inches by 5 inches. And unlike most camping stoves, this doesn't use a fuel canister. Instead, you break up small twigs and branches you may find around the campsite and put them into the burner area. The stove uses the wood as its fuel. The advantage is you never have to worry about running out of fuel on your trip. And this stove can produce enough power to not only power the fans that optimize the burn, but it has some spare power, allowing you to charge some electronics like your phone. So why is this such a compelling option? Well, as I said, using your wood as the fuel is actually hugely valuable. If you're going on an extended trip, you might have to carry a few fuel canisters with you to support the entire trip. You don't need to do that with the camp stove. All of your fuel you're going to discover right at your campground. So it's something where the fuel is effectively infinite for you, and you never have to worry about running out of it. The other advantage is that since it can charge your electronics, it's doing double duty. You may not need to bring a big power brick along with you to charge up your phone or any other electronics that you might have. And this I find is best when paired with the kettle pot, which is their large pot. The cool thing about the kettle pot is that the stove nests inside of it. So you really don't have to have a huge amount of pack size. Your pack is going to be just the kettle pot because everything is going to be inside of that. Now it works with other cookware like pans. They also have their own grill, which I use also. It's really cool if you want to grill a couple steaks at the campsite. Now, the downside is, as I've said, it's bulky. The other thing is when you're trying to get the fire going, it can take a little bit more time because you have to collect the wood, then you have to start the fire, you have to get it hot enough where it actually starts burning to the point where you actually can get the fans going and get enough heat going to start the boil of water. So it takes a little bit more time. To me, this is the ideal one to use when you're on an extended camping trip. So, for example, I used this on a backcountry discovery route last year. I was camping for about 10 days, and this is the stove that I used for my entire trip. So I cooked my meals on it. I made my coffee water with it. Everything was done just with this one stove, and I never had to worry over 10 days of camping that I was going to run out of fuel because everything was available right at any campsite for me to just grab some twigs, throw them in there, heat it up really, really effectively. Now, the other option that you can do is actually by a company that's very well known in the industry, and that's Jetboil. And they were actually the originator of this concept of an integrated cook vessel and stove. And the cool thing with them is that the stove, the fuel canister, and the stabilizer feet all nest inside the cook vessel to keep it compact. And it can boil water very quickly, thus the name Jetboil. You have to decide with this particular unit what your priority is going to be. So typically what they're going to have is where you can focus on coffee only. And this is where you might need it just to boil water to use for coffee or dehydrated meals. And something like the Flash would be the ideal one there. It's also one of their smallest options. And the stove is basically going to be either off or on full blast. So you can't fine tune it to support simmering if you wanted to actually cook some meals, not dehydrated meals, but real meals. So if you do want to have a little bit more flexibility with cooking, you'd want to look at some other options in their catalog. one of the ones that I can suggest for that, which is what I personally use now, is called one of the Mo stoves. I actually have the mini Mo. And the advantage of this is that it tends to be a little bit of a shorter, wider vessel. So it's a little bit easier if you wanted to stew something and cook it. The other advantage is that the stove itself is regulated. And this means that you can actually adjust the flame intensity. So you can move it all the way down to a simmer or all the way up to a full burn. So for me, what I find with the Jetboils is because they have the fuel canister, if I'm going for like a weekend or maybe even a long weekend, I'll usually bring the Jetboil. It's very fast to set up and get your water boiled. And if you're just cooking dehydrated meals, it's ideal as well, especially if you just do the flash. But my typical dividing line and whether I bring the Jetboil or the BioLite is how many meals or coffee boils that I need for the trip. So a small fuel canister will easily support a weekend for yourself and maybe one other person. If you're going to be going for longer, you'll want to carry that spare fuel. And now that savings in terms of size for the BioLite is lost. So I'll just bring the BioLite instead. The other advantage of the BioLite is, of course, the ability to charge my electronics, which means I don't have to bring a battery brick. So it's kind of doing two different functions, and therefore you can look at its size as effectively eliminating a power brick. So really, weekend versus long trip, leaving that battery brick at home, that's the advantage of the BioLite versus the Jetboil. But if you're just going for a quick weekend jaunt, the Jetboil is awesome. It's going to be a little bit smaller pack size, so it's perfect for those type of trips. But I'd love to know what you think. Do you bring a separate stove and kettles, or do you prefer one of the integrated approach? And if you do prefer the integrated approach, what's your favorite stove combination that you use? Text us through the link in the show notes, and we'll share your feedback in a future episode. Now, what you want to use for your coffee will probably influence your next steps. Ideally, if you're a huge coffee aficionado, you're going to have a favorite bean that you're used to running. If you're maybe just looking for, hey, I just need to have something when I'm going out on a motorcycle, I want to have a decent cup of coffee that I can just make it at the campsite. This is where you might start to look at a divide between what I'll describe as like instant coffee versus more of a artisanal or a typically ground and brewed coffee. So if you're going to do the instant coffee, there's a few different options you can explore here. So first off, I break this down to a couple different options. One would be what I'll call a dissolving brand. And what I mean by this is something like the Starbucks Via. And these are tiny little packs. They're single serving packs for each one of them. And they can fit pretty much anywhere in your pack. So it's super, super easy and convenient to bring along. And as each pouch is pre-measured, you simply open it up, pour it into your cup, and add the hot water. The thing is that the taste is like, it's okay. I mean, it's definitely coffee, but it's going to have a little bit of a grittier flavor because it's dissolved into there. And it's not going to be quite as fresh as if you had something that was more recently ground. So you've got to sort of think of that dividing line between the quality of the coffee that you're looking for versus the convenience and space savings that you're going to get with something like Starbucks Via. Now, there are other brands that also make instant coffee. The challenge, I'd say, with many of those, and that's why I tend to sort of think of like the Via as being the option for moto camping, is that most of them are intended for use at home. So the packaging tends to be a little bit physically larger. They assume they're going to have a measuring spoon. So when you start to add in all of those, now you're starting to think of like the extra bulk that you need to bring with you. It's certainly convenient at home, but maybe not as ideal for on the road. So I tend to think of like the Starbucks Via from the dissolving type of instant coffee as being a good option. Now, there's another one that's pretty cool, which is kind of taking the same premise as a tea bag, where they'll actually distribute the coffee inside of a tea bag. So you can just rip it open, take out the tea bag, and now you just infuse it into the water just like you would a regular cup of tea. But these are coffee grinds that are in that bag. So you'll steep it just as you would a tea. And the advantage over those dissolving ones, be it the other brands or the Starbucks Via, is that you don't have that grit inside of your coffee. And this I find makes the flavor a little bit nicer. It's a better experience for it. It is physically a little bit bulkier though than the Via. So, you take your pick of where your level of. It's not like it's massively, it's a little bit larger, but it is something that you have to think of. Now, another one that you could think of for using in this sort of an instant coffee vein would be a capsule. So things like, you might want to use a capsule like one of those from Nespresso. And these are actually really good when paired with something like the Wakeko Minipresso NS for making espresso. And they're available in a wide variety of flavors, so you can bring your favorite one with you. So if we think of instant coffee, there's a massive amount of convenience. It doesn't require a lot of extra gear. And if you're really limited on space, it might be your only option to be able to have some coffee with you on the go. You just basically need a stove that you can heat water from. And then whether it's the tea bags or the Starbucks Via or the capsules, you've got something that can actually bring some bit of coffee. But if you love artisanal coffee and you want to try to bring that coffee shop experience with you, they might leave you wanting a little bit more. And this is where you can start to look at a couple of other options that you can do. So if you have your own favorite beans that you have at home, well, you could pre-grind them at home, stick them into a little bag, like a Ziploc bag or something, and bring them with you. The advantage, of course, is that you don't have to bring a grinder with you. You've already pre-ground your grinds. But I really like to have freshly ground coffee. So I think that's a good option if you're really, really tight on space and you can't afford to bring a hand grinder with you. But I always buy all of my coffee in a whole bean and I grind it just before I brew it. And this is where the whole beans are that I actually prefer myself. So this is where I mostly bring it. I bring the beans, I bring a grinder, and now I have that wonderful experience of sitting around the campsite in the morning. The sun has just risen and I'm sitting there grinding the beans for a wonderful, wonderful cup of coffee. So that's my personal preference, but I'd love to know what you think. Do you prefer whole beans? Do you prefer pre-ground? Or do you prefer instant coffee when you're moto camping? Text the show through the link in the show notes and we'll share your feedback in a future episode. Now, if you're not going to use instant coffee, but you're going to use one of the pre-ground or the beans, you're going to have to start to think about how you're going to brew that coffee. And there's a few different options that I'll go through here. And they're going to be in different levels of complexity, different levels of sizing, and you'll have to figure out what maybe particular brewing approach you prefer will make sense for you. Now, the simplest one that you can do is actually most similar to that sort of Starbucks Via. It's typically referred to as cowboy coffee. And essentially, you just throw the grinds into your cup and add hot water. Now, you don't want to drink your coffee all the way to the bottom because the grinds will be in there. There's a chance that it can over-extract because the grinds are sitting there in your coffee. So you'd oftentimes put in fewer grinds or maybe a different grind size than you normally would. But the advantage is you don't need any additional brewers. Personally, this isn't something that I would ever intentionally do. I have had some moto camping trips where I forgot to pack some stuff. And from that point on, I always made sure I had a list, but it was the only way that I could have coffee in the morning. So learn from my mistakes, and let's talk about maybe some of the more practical brewing options that are out there. I'm going to start with a drip or a pour over style. Now, this is one of my favorite brewing styles at home. And what you can do here is you can actually get a collapsible cone that you put over your cup and you add a paper cone filter into it for making your coffee. And while the brewer is very compact, you still need to have a cup and you need to carry some paper filters with you. You'll also want to have a garbage bag to take them with you to follow the leave no trace outdoor philosophy. So a couple options that you can use in here. One of them would be the UST Flexware Coffee Drip. You can get this pretty much anywhere for less than $10. It does need a cup though, but it's very, very simple. It's just a rubberized, collapsible cone, very simple to use. The second one that I could suggest was actually from Wakeko, and they make what's called the cup of mocha. Now, this includes the mug into which the rest of the brewer nests, and it's available for a little bit less than $40, but this gives you a single unit where you've got your mug and your brewer all in one. Now, if you want to have a little bit of a different choice of how you brew your coffee when you're camping, the other one you can do is a French press. Now, this can also be a very compact option. For example, if you're using a jet boil like the Flash, they actually sell French press plungers that are sized to fit that water vessel. So you can brew your coffee right in the jet boil. Now, you still need a mug to pour the coffee into, but this is a very simple approach that won't break the bank. And the jet boil presses are available for less than $20. And in fact, BioLite also has a similar option into there. So you can get those that go directly into your integrated stove. If you're not, then there's another couple of options that you can use. And these will depend upon whether you want to use something that pours into it or that you're actually using it to cook itself. So one of them is the Stanley pot and French press. And this is a good option if you're using that standalone stove as opposed to the integrated ones. So you can pack the stove in this cup while you're traveling, and you just need space for the fuel canister. And what you do with this is that the pot actually goes directly onto your stove, and you heat your water into there, and then it has a French press built into it, which you can then just plunge down to create your coffee and then pour it into your cup. So very convenient, good option if you really prefer the French press as your style of brewing. Another one that you could try is from a camping company called GSI. And this is their insulated brewer with a French press. Especially if you're camping in cooler weather, this is a good option because the brewer itself is insulated and the press is part of that. So you'd still pour it into a collapsible cup. There's actually a good one from Sea to Summit that I'll show in the show notes. And it can make coffee for up to about 30 ounces. So this is a good option if you want to brew a few cups of coffee in the morning or if you're traveling with others. So good brewer, you still need to cook it in an independent pot. So you'd want to use something integrated like the jet boil or the BioLite, but good option if you want to do a French press. Now, another one that I can talk about is actually the AeroPress Go. Now, AeroPress has always been a very popular option for camping. And the reason for that is its plastic construction helps to keep it light. And there's a variety of recipes that you can find that work best for you. But the particular unit that I like for camping is actually called the AeroPress Go. It's a little bit smaller than a standard espresso, but includes the mug and the brewer nests inside of the mug, keeping the pack size very, very small. So all you do is you just add your grinds into the AeroPress, you let it seep for a few minutes, and you plunge it down to put it into the cup. Now, the filter paper is just a flat circle, the diameter of the brewer. So even with leave no trace, your garbage bag is going to be really tiny. So it's very, very convenient. Now, when you really miss your favorite coffee shop and you want to have espresso while you're camping, you're probably going to be looking at one of the Wakeco brewers like the Nanopresso or the Picopresso or the Minipresso. And there's a couple of options that I'll share here. So one of them is the Minipresso GR. And this is about $60. And this is a good entry point into portable espresso using ground coffee. It includes a cup, so you're all set for espresso on the go. You can just put in your grinds, the hot water goes in, and a few pumps, and you're starting to make your espresso. So very, very convenient. It is an all plastic construction, so it's going to be a little bit physically larger and may not last quite as long because you're trying to pressurize all of that material into there. So just be aware that that's sort of the trade-off onto it. Now, if you take that same unit in the Minipresso, but now make it designed to support the Nespresso capsules that we mentioned in the coffee section, you can get the Minipresso NS2. This is their newer version of the Nespresso capsule version. It's also around $60, and this can be a good compromise because you don't have to bring a grinder or a scale or anything else, and you still can have espresso with you. Now, if you really want to up your game, the Picopresso has more metal in it, and it even includes a metal tamper for you to make sure that your pack is proper. It's a bit more compact than the Minipresso, so if you're pressed for space, but you still want to have espresso, this is the option to go for. You will need a cup though, and this is what I personally use for espresso on the go. We actually have a full review of this brewer on the Tank of Coffee website, and I'll share all the links of that on the show notes. But we break down into all the ins and outs of that. Picopresso is usually available for around about $130, so it is more pricey than both of the Minipresso options, but something if you really want to have the absolute best options for you when you're doing camping. I really like the PicoPresso. In summary, if we think about some of the brewers, the ones that I usually bring with me is going to be my AeroPress Go and my PicoPresso. And I oftentimes actually bring both. So I actually have a couple options. Maybe I feel more like an espresso at one point, a regular AeroPress at another. And I can switch it up even in the morning, or even if I want to have some coffee in the evenings. Yes, I do drink coffee in the evenings. I really enjoy late night coffee, but that's just part of being a bit of a coffee addict. The advantage of the AeroPress Go and even using with the PicoPresso is that I already have a cup. So I can use that one cup both for AeroPress coffee as well as for the PicoPresso. So it just makes it super convenient for me to bring both of those along. But I'd love to know what you think. What's your favorite way to prepare coffee at home? And do you have that same favorite when you're moto camping? And what do you like to do when you're moto camping? And is there a different brewer than what I discussed that you like to use when you're moto camping? Text the show through the link in the show notes, and we'll share your feedback in a future episode. Now, there's also accessories that you're going to need for all of these brewers and coffee that I mentioned earlier in the episode. And the first one of those is if you're not using an AeroPress Go or that Wakeiko Cup of Mocha, is you're going to want to bring a cup. And as I said, on a motorcycle, pack size is the most critical. So I like the collapsible options. Now, Sea to Summit makes one that is stainless steel in a shallow cone shape, but it collapses into itself. So it effectively creates a very shallow, flat pack, kind of like that UST cone filter that you can use for a brewer. And it has ribbed rubber on the outside, to make sure that you can grip the cup really effectively, but it also helps to keep the heat in check. So you're not going to burn your hand holding onto this, because many times when we're out camping, we don't really have a convenient surface to put the cup on top of. So having that rubberized and ribbed grip really makes it convenient. And even if you're traveling with someone else, this is a great option to use as a second cup for them. So even if you had, let's say, like an AeroPress Go, getting a second one of these allows you to make a couple of cups of coffee and be able to serve whoever you're riding with. Beyond the cup, one of the things that you're going to want to have is if you're bringing beans, you're going to want to bring a grinder. And there's a couple of options that I can share here. Now, one of these is from a camping company specifically, and that's the GSI Java Grind. It's about $40, and this is a good entry point into a camping grinder. I actually used this one for many, many years. The construction of it is mostly plastic. There is, of course, metal for the grinder into there, but I found that it can be a little slow to grind, and it actually would end up taking several minutes to grind the beans, even at a fairly rough grind size, which tends to be a little bit longer or shorter to grind. So that's the sort of the trade-off. The other one that I can suggest is the Wakeiko ExaGrind. Now, this is a premium grinder, and the weight reflects that. It's 464 grams with a conical burr grinder and a steel container. So it's a hefty piece of kit to bring with you. Now, if I was backpacking, I would probably use the GSI. But if you're on a motorcycle, the weight isn't so much the problem. It's the pack size. Now, the Java Grind and the ExaGrind are actually about the same physical size when you're packing them up. So it's not a pack size problem for this. It's really about weight. And so, as I say, I wouldn't use the ExaGrind for backpacking if I'm really counting grams. But the beauty of it is you can adjust the grind size to one of 60 different settings. So dialing in your brew is really, really easy. And it's such a solid construction, it will probably outlive you. And you could be grinding on this thing. You're not going to worry about breaking anything. The GSI, the grinder handle is obviously a lot thinner. It's easier to bend. The plastic construction of the rest of it could get damaged, maybe drops in a fall or whatnot. So you may wear them out after a little bit of time, but the ExaGrind is going to last you for a long time. But to be fair, it is priced to reflect that. It's about $120. So versus the $40 for a Java Grind from GSI, it is significantly more expensive. But it will last forever. The thing is beautifully made, super, super solid. So when one thinks of this, quality doesn't come cheap. So if you want it, and also I'd say, I forgot to mention this, but the ExaGrind I found was actually a faster grinder as well than the Java grind. So I found that typically, even if I'm doing like an espresso grind, it's less than a minute for grinding. Whereas for even something like, normal drip coffee on the Java grind, it's several minutes. So it can take a long time in terms of the difference between them. So for me, the precision, the wide grind size adjustment of the ExaGrind, and actually the speed of grinding, it's worth it. And if you're only doing drip coffee, maybe a cheaper grinder might be enough because you don't need that really fine-tuned control that the ExaGrind will go with. So that's why I want to have both of these options. I think they're both solid options, but if you're want to have the flexibility of doing both espresso and drip coffee, I would probably lean more towards the ExaGrind. And if you want to kind of buy once and just use it forever, I think the ExaGrind is probably the better option between those two. As I said, I've personally owned both. And the earlier GSI version that I had, I've used for many years. But once I got the PicoPresso, I actually upgraded to the ExaGrind so that I'd have the faster grind and even more control. So it's definitely a luxury, but I also love having great coffee with me. So to me, it was worth it. One other accessory that I'll suggest that is a good option for you is a scale. Now, this is for the ultimate in precision coffee making. So the scale is going to make sure that you have the best results. Now, while most scales aren't exactly pricey nor huge, I do consider them a little bit more of a luxury item because you're going to want to have a steady enough table to get a good reading with the scale. So if you don't want to pack a table, skip the scale and just use a scoop to approximate the grinds needed. And then most brewers will have a reference that you can use for approximating the amount of water. So you may not get the brew ratio exactly right without using a scale, but you've got to pick where you want to go. Now, if you want to use a scale, there's a couple options that I can suggest. One is the Time More coffee scale. And this is actually what I use at home. It allows you to do a tare weight. It also has a timer onto it. And it has a built-in rechargeable battery that can be charged via USB-C. And it costs around $60. It's a bit larger at about 6 inches by 5 inches by 1 inch. But that's due to the convenience of the built-in battery. But I found with this particular scale, even if I'm using it every day, I only need to recharge it every few months. So the battery will last you for a very, very long time. I wouldn't even sweat it bringing it camping. You're not going to have to recharge it on the whole trip. It's going to just continue to work for you very effectively. But it is a bit larger. The other option that I can throw out there would be also from Mokeco is the Exagram. Now, this is actually going to be cheaper than the Time More and a bit smaller. So it's 3 inches by 5 inches by 1 inch. And this is available for about $35. So versus the $60 of the Time More. It does rely on 2 AAA batteries. So you need to carry them and probably some spares when you're going camping. It's noticeably smaller than the Time More at about 3 inches less wide. So it is a little bit easier to pack. So I think this becomes just sort of a judgment call of what you prefer to do. If you want to bring some batteries along with you, or if you want to bring the rechargeable. If you already are using the Time More at home and you just want to use the same scale when you're going camping, convenient. But if you're leaving a family at home who might still want to be able to make their own coffee, you may not have that option. So as I said, I think a scale is sort of a little bit of a luxury. I don't always bring a scale with me when I'm camping. If you're using an AeroPress, for example, you do have markers on the side that you can use to estimate the amount of water. It won't be as precise as a scale, but can often be close enough. I mean, we're camping. Let's be a little pragmatic with it. We're not going to have the absolute most perfectly brewed coffee when we're camping, but we want to get pretty close. Now, if you're doing an espresso machine like the PicoPresso, you can also estimate the amount of your extraction by the number of pumps. Again, it's not going to be as precise as if you had a scale to look at what you've actually extracted. But if you're really pressed for space, it might be the best compromise to avoid taking a scale. Now, with a pour over, I think bringing the scale becomes a little bit more important as estimating the water is much harder. The Exagram in this case isn't huge and can even fit in a jacket pocket if your saddlebags are full. So it might be, if you prefer a pour over style coffee, it might be worth bringing that scale along with you. But what do you think? Do you leave your grinder and your scale at home, or are they must-haves for you when you're moto camping? And is there a grinder or a scale that you use while moto camping that I didn't discuss? Text the show through the link in the show notes, and I'll share your feedback in a future episode. So we talked about some stove options. We talked about the idea that you can have standalone parts, individual stove and a kettle versus an integrated one. We even talked about a wood burning versus a fuel canister stove. We talked about brewers, where you could range from having a pour-over brewer to a French press to an AeroPress to even espresso. Lots of different options there. And for accessories, we talked about some ones that I think are really critical to consider, such as a mug, a grinder, and a scale. Now, you may have noticed that several of the options that I mentioned are actually from Kettles. Now, I'm a big fan of the brand because they come from a coffee-first perspective. And some of the other brands that I discussed today are coming at it from a camping-first perspective. So you'll see that philosophy end up into how the pieces are made and the precision and the quality that you have of that experience. So Keiko is really a brand focused on portable coffee making, and they make very high quality gear. And it does show in terms of what that experience is. So I think if you want as close to a coffee shop experience while camping, I've had amazing success with the Keiko products. It by no means means other brands like GSI are bad at all, but I think they're just coming from different philosophy points. And so you have to see what's more important to you. If you just want something that is like lighter, cheaper, and really focused on camping, the GSI type options are phenomenal choices into there. If you're willing to have maybe a little bit more weight, a little bit more expense, but you want the highest quality, I think the Keiko gives you that extra edge there. So thank you so much for listening. I hope this was a helpful episode for you. And if you do love listening to the Throttle and Roast podcast, please be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or your favorite podcasts app. And be sure to share it with someone who you think might actually enjoy this episode. If they're trying to figure out how to make the best coffee while they're moto camping, we hope that the tips in this episode will be helpful to them. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend about the show. You can often share an episode directly from your podcast app, or you can direct them to throttleandroast.com. Word of mouth is the best way for us to grow and find new listeners, so I really appreciate your help.